Eating disorders in literature have long evoked the fascination of cultural and literary critiques. Early feminist psychoanalytic literary critics identified eating disorders in literature as the symptomatic linchpins that can diagnose societal ills, whereas more recent scholarship has looked toward characters' eating disorders as a path toward social resistance. In my scholarship, I searched for nuance between these two ideas, unpacking literature where characters are neither victims nor groundbreaking revolutionaries to their disordered dietary practices. The terms eating disordered and disordered eating have fluctuated meanings between fields. Thus, it is crucial before I begin my own analysis employing these terms to unpack their etymological history and the ways these terms have been used at times to help people identify and better destructive behavior, and at other times to diagnose, silence, categorize, and further marginalize populations for their dietary deviances. For instance, the etymology of the term eating disorder exposes its medical history of marking the distinction between healthy groups and those who do not fit standard normative ideas of health. The Oxford English Dictionary defines eating disorder as a noun for any of the various psychological disorders characterized by abnormal or disturbed eating habits. In contrast, eating disordered is an adjective, sometimes hyphenated, to describe an individual or group who have been affected with an eating disorder. The DSM-5 defines feeding and eating disorders as behavioral patterns that are characterized by a persistent disturbance of eating or eating-related behavior that results in the altered consumption or absorption of food and that significantly impairs physical health or psychosocial functioning. Thus, even in this definition that serves to diagnose individuals, there is a clear understanding that societal norms impact what a psychologist or physician can diagnose as disordered. In my research, I will use the term disordered eating to discuss eating behavior that is detrimental to an individual's health, while steering away from the terms eating disorder, anorexia, bulimia, and other terms I believe more fitting for a medical professional than a literary scholar. That said, disordered eating has its own complicated medical and cultural history. In the medical sense, disordered eating is a term to help mark and identify behavioral patterns that may lead to eating disorders, or a range of irregular eating behaviors that may or may not warrant a diagnosis of a specific eating disorder. They are effectively the clinical warning signs that mark an individual as more susceptible to diagnosable disorder. Thus, identifying and addressing disordered eating practices in the individual becomes a way for medical professionals and other concerned caretakers to identify the possibility for, but hopefully mitigate or lessen, future acute medical crises. In its current usage, disordered eating is often used to de-emphasize the individual and focus on the behavior. It is still often used as a type of adjectival phrase, but unlike the eating disordered person, there are disordered eating behaviors or disordered eating practices. In contemporary medical usage, it seems the modified noun is more often than not left implied, as recent articles note disordered eating as its own term, distinct from eating disorders, helpful to discuss behaviors that are potentially dangerous but not diagnosable. Crucially, these behaviors can include dieting, overindulging, and other acts that are medically deemed non-normative because they deviate from healthy behavior, but are in fact common, hegemonically normalized from a cultural perspective. By using the term disordered eating, I hope to separate this language from its strict behavioral science etymology, while evoking and reworking it for the purpose of cultural analysis. Disordered eating evokes the space between order and disorder, the space between health and sickness, and the space where future crisis can be identified but is not yet inevitable. Through this linguistic choice, I hope to highlight the constructed tension between individual health and cultural hegemonic normativity, and de-emphasize the diagnostic nature of discussing eating disorders.